Hey everybody, it's Miss Kennedy. So this is part 2 of the Unit 6 review. It's going to be focusing on renewable energy and how to conserve energy, and I promise it's going to be a lot shorter. So I'm starting with my cat because he's been super cute during quarantine and I have so many pictures of him and I want to share him with you. And he's a little model, and then all he does is sleep. So sometimes he's cute and then he's sleeping, but enjoy. I think they're adorable pictures. Alright, so we're first going to start talking about biomass and biofuel. So biomass is just any organic matter that can be used as fuel. A lot of very common biomass is wood. In developing countries, people burn wood for energy. You can use garbage. You can use like vegetables, like corn is a really common biofuel. You can even use like gas produced from a landfill. Like I think I talked about it in one video. But there's a lot of different like things that were once living or are made from living things that you can turn into fuel, which is kind of cool. So basically you just have this big storage of biomass. It gets broken down into like basically just like muddy stuff, and then it's kind of pushed through this little filter and burned. Once it's burned, you get that steam generated. Same principle as every other type of energy. The steam spins a turbine, the turbine powers a generator, the generator powers our cities. So we could have an entire city powered on trash, which would be really cool, I think. And then I'm going to go into biofuels a little bit more. So biofuels, like any liquid that can be derived from trees, trash, crops, you can, instead of just burning it directly, you can process it. It goes through all these different materials to then be like turned into an actual liquid like this, and then it's stored. So instead of just burning it to use on a generator immediately, you can use it to like you can store it in these facilities here and have it for infinite amounts of time. So you can make this fuel from trees, from crops, from trash, all those sorts of things. You can use them to make this like kind of fuel or gas that can then power cars and all these really cool things. So that's really awesome. It has a lot less emissions, so lower carbon monoxide and less toxic emissions going into the air. It's becoming more rapidly used around the world, and it can obviously, like, there's no limit to it because there's no limit to the trash that humans can make, and we could grow a lot of crops, so it's not going to run out anytime soon, which is why it's a renewable. And I think it's a really interesting one. It's not one that always comes to mind when you think about renewable energy. Now we're talking about solar. Solar is definitely the one that comes to most people's minds. And there are actually two types of solar. There's passive solar energy and there's active solar energy. So passive solar energy is basically just using the sun's energy and designing a house that like is made to just take the sun's energy in the best way possible. So you're designing a house that's really efficient. You put it in front of sun and it will basically just heat itself. So this is a passive solar energy house that's designed to collect the sun's energy without any other any technology, any electricity, none of that. So it has this really big window that will take in like winter suns, and it faces the sun directly during that season. So it gets heated through this big window. And then it has this summer sun. It has like a little like shading thing so that you don't overheat in the summer, and then you don't have to run air conditioning. So it's kind of designed to be like natural air conditioning because it has that like block for the sun. There's also really good insulation in the house to keep it airtight, so you're not like losing any heat or air conditioning in the winter or the summer. So this house is just designed to take the sun and use it well, or to like keep the sun away when it's too hot. So you don't have to be using your air conditioning and your heat as much because this house is designed to use passive solar energy to make it more efficient. So that's one type of solar energy, not a very common type, but still really interesting. And then there's active solar energy, which is what everyone knows is those solar panels. I'm going to get into those in my next slide. But you're using some kind of device, solar panels usually, to convert the sun's energy into something more usable, such as usually electricity, but you could also convert it to hot water. So you're taking the sun's energy, hits these panels, gets turned into electricity that you can use to power your whole house. So I'm going to get a little bit into how photovoltaics work because it's always a very common question on this test. Don't feel like you need to totally understand this picture here. It's kind of confusing, but I'm just going to try and break it down for you. Okay, so solar photovoltaics, or PV, they're called PV cells, which is really just like the process that goes on inside the photovoltaic panel. Okay, so they make electricity they absorb the sun, and when the sun hits the panels, the photons from the sun, which is kind of more chemistry than you need to know, they hit the panel and they basically create an electrical current. There's a big reaction between neutrons and electrons in the actual cell, but you don't need to know about that. let's hope, just know that when the sun hits the solar panel, it creates an electric current through this crazy confusing process, and you have this electric current that will flow, and then you can have it plug into an electrical box here that will convert it into energy to use in your whole house. So it's very, very complex. I'm just hitting on like the surface of it. But again, sun gets turned into electrical current using this panel that's really incredibly designed. It's some really cool science that goes into it, so if you're interested in learning more, message me. But they're designed to be put on top of houses. You can have like fields of solar panels now, and this is actually a Tesla solar panel. They're really beautiful, and they're really, really cheap. Tesla's like totally killing it with the renewable energy game, and they are coming out with these incredible solar panels for houses that are highly efficient, like self-cleaning, and they look really cool, because a big problem with a lot of solar panels is that they're ugly. So I just wanted to throw that in, that Tesla is doing really good work with photovoltaics. So the next one is geothermal energy. I think it's one of my favorites because it's very simple and very eco-friendly. But basically geothermal works by finding areas, my cat wants to say hi, finding areas where there's water deep under the surface of our earth, so like a few miles down below the surface, and there's a big like reservoir or like storage area of hot water, and that releases a lot of steam. So we like locate those areas where there's a lot of steam coming from underground water sources, and we use that steam to then produce electricity, because as you guys hopefully have been getting from these videos, you use steam, the pressure created from steam, to spin a turbine that then powers a generator that then powers an entire electrical grid. So it's the same concept as all the other types of energy, but we're using natural steam instead of another fuel to make the steam. So that's why I think it's kind of cool. You're like taking out one extra step. They're pretty eco-friendly. I'll get into some of the things that are a little worrisome about them at the very end of this video. But that's geothermal, and this is what a real geothermal plant looks like. So a little bit destructive of nature, but still interesting. So the next one is hydroelectric power, and basically these work by damming an area. So dams are basically like where you cut off a water supply. So you cut off a water supply, you have a reservoir of that water, but then the water will naturally kind of fall through it, and it's falling like Niagara Falls. It's really fast, really intense. So you use the energy of that falling water to actually generate electricity. So you have the energy, it's called kinetic energy when it's just falling, like with gravity, it's natural. So that falling water will turn into mechanical energy, meaning energy you can use to like do stuff, like lift a weight or something like that. That will turn into mechanical energy that spins a turbine and then powers a generator. Same concept, just using water, like the speed of water instead of steam energy. Okay, so that's how hydroelectric works. There's hydroelectric across America in tons of different countries. Very interesting, and I'll get into some of the pros and cons in a minute. The next is wind energy. Pretty simple. The wind, natural wind, will turn this propeller of these big wind turbines, and that there's like a really not complicated, but very complex like gearbox that then connects to a generator, so that wind essentially is turning, like it's like acting like the turbine, so it's activating all these different processes to then power the generator. So the wind itself is like one giant turbine that then powers this generator here. It is connected to a transformer, which is just a way to get energy into an electrical grid. Okay, so wind is a turbine basically. The wind powers this big propeller turbine to power the generator inside the wind turbine, and they're all over the country, all over the world. They're offshore, like in this is somewhere off of France, so they're in the water. This is actually in my Southern California, near where I live or grew up. So they're all over the world, and they're pretty interesting, but also have some negatives that I will speak about in a minute. So the next one we're going to talk about is a hydrogen fuel cell. We watched a video on it in class. I don't want you to really stress about this. I am very doubtful that it's going to be on the test, but just understand that it's this like complicated device called a fuel cell where it takes hydrogen, it takes that element, and all the stored chemical energy from hydrogen forces it to undergo these two electrical reactions to then create like an electric current that can radiate around the fuel cell and then be used to power things like cars. So this is a car powered by a hydrogen fuel cell. So that this sort of device is sitting in the car like an engine would. Okay, so that's hydrogen fuel cells. A little bit different than the rest and not as commonly tested on, let's hope. So I wanted to make the pros and cons like easily accessible to you guys, because they probably will be asked about. You're not gonna have to explain how like a power plant works, but you should know the pros and cons of different types of energy. So I made this for you to keep it simple, you should have this on the test, take a picture of it, write it down, whatever. If you want to stop here and just read this over yourself, that's fine. I'm going to spend the next few minutes kind of going over it, but feel free to do with this what you want, okay? And just a general note, all renewables are more efficient or more eco-friendly than non-renewables. So some of them might emit some greenhouse gases in the factories and the power plants, and like solar panels do have some toxic materials that are released, which I didn't even write in the cons, but compared to fossil fuels, it's nothing. Like it's they're so much more efficient and so much better for our planet. But in general, they are a little bit expensive because it's an entirely new technology for the most part, and it's not like widespread like an oil power plant would be or something like that. So it's more expensive to get these going, get them off the ground, because we rely so much on non-renewables. Switching over to renewables is very costly. But biomass, the pros of biomass and biofuels, they're very reliable, and it's also a way to reduce waste. So if we're taking all this trash from landfills and then burning it for fuel, that's getting rid of more trash on our planet, which is great. And another pro is that there's tons and tons of trash easily available. It can also be stored as a biofuel to be used centuries from now, which is cool. Cons are that it is an expensive process. It can take up a lot of space to store it. And there are some pollutants that you get from burning these fuels. So that is the pros and cons of biomass and biofuels. Next, I'm going to talk about solar. Solar is easily available because most people have access to the sun. It can reduce your electricity costs in your house, so a lot of people do it to save on their energy bills. It's very quiet. The technology is always improving. People are investing tons and tons of money in this technology, which is great. There are a few greenhouse gas emissions, and there are even some government subsidies. So governments are now giving you tax breaks to install solar, which is a big incentive for a lot of people to switch to solar. And so now the cons, it is expensive, but it's still cheaper than just paying for regular electricity like most of us do now. So like I pay an electricity bill that is pretty costly, and if I switched over to solar, I would pay a lot up front, but then in the long run, my bill would be a lot cheaper. Another con is that it doesn't work at night, obviously because there's no sun, and a lot of people say they are ugly, but I think Tesla's working on making them a little cooler, so let's hope. Next is geothermal. Geothermal is very efficient, and it's mostly underground, so there's very little destruction to our natural ecosystems. There's very few greenhouse gases emitted, and it's available a lot of places because there's tons of underground water all over the world. It is very expensive up front to build this sort of setup. It can cause earthquakes, interestingly, like similar to fracking. When you drill underground, you can cause earthquakes. And ideal locations are hard to come by. So there is a lot of water available all over the place, but they're not necessarily available for certain countries. So that's geothermal. Next, we're going to talk about hydroelectric. It's very reliable because we have lots of water on our planet, and the water cycle keeps it flowing continuously. It's very safe. It's pretty cheap to maintain a dam. There's not a lot of money being put into it once you build it. And they're designed to last a really long time. So they are pretty efficient. And there are few greenhouse gases emitted, like with most of them. Cons of hydroelectric: it is very expensive up front to build a dam. It's not a cheap process at all. It damages the natural way that water flows. You're messing with the natural water cycle when you build this like kind of wall to stop a river from flowing. You're messing with nature's plan for the water. It can affect fish populations and other animals and organisms that rely on that flowing water. And then if there's a drought, your hydroelectric dam might suffer because there's not as much water. So we can't control when there are droughts, but they can cause damage to a hydroelectric dam. If there's no water, you can't really have hydropower. All right, wind energy. Wind is cheap, it's efficient to use, and it's an efficient use of space because you can have tons and tons of turbines in a very small area, and very few greenhouse gases emitted. Some of the more interesting cons are that it's pretty noisy to hear the turbines, so people living near turbines would definitely consider that a con. And it also interferes with bird migration. When turbines first came about, people were like, they're killing the birds, blah, 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 because birds would like fly into them and stuff. That's no different than birds flying into a building, but it does, like, certain birds like to migrate in big patterns or big groups throughout deserts, throughout the ocean, and the turbines can get in the way of those migrations. Next and last is hydrogen fuel cells. We have tons and tons of hydrogen on the planet. It's a naturally occurring element. And it's also incredibly efficient. This type of energy gives you so much power compared to other types of energy. And there are a lot of potential uses for hydrogen fuel cells, but the cons make it a little bit harder for us to like use those potential or use its potential. It's really expensive. It's available all over the place, but to actually like make hydrogen available is very costly. It's super flammable, like we talked about, and you don't really want it in your car if it's a flammable substance. You never know what could happen. And it's also very difficult to store and move. So it's definitely not as user-friendly as something like a solar panel. There are a lot more risks associated with a hydrogen fuel cell. So that's it for pros and cons. Thanks for sticking with me if you did. Last thing I want to talk about is energy conservation, which might be on the test. They're going to ask you, what can you do as an individual to conserve energy? And it's not just like switching to renewables, because you as a person, you can't really do that. You can install solar panels. You can also do things like switch to Energy Star appliances, which are these like certified energy efficient fridges, washing machines, dishwashers, all of that. I know most of us aren't going to do that. Like, I don't really have the ability to do that, but it is something you could write on the test. You can switch to LED lights, which are more efficient than regular incandescent bulbs. They're way more powerful, they're cheaper, and they last a lot longer. Obviously, the easy one is just walk, bike, carpool, stop using as many fossil fuels when you do your daily activities. And another interesting one, if you're into like architecture, is double pane windows. So double pane windows keep heat in, keep your house cool. They filter the sunlight efficiently, so you're not like sitting in a house that's feel like it's like if your house is all windows, you're going to be really hot in the summer and pretty cold in the winter. But these double pane windows ensure that your temperature is pretty regulated, so you're not running your heat and your AC all the time. So those are 4 different things you can do to conserve energy. I'm sure you can think of more creative ones, but do like pick something concrete. Don't just say, oh, every human should stop using fossil fuels. That's way too vague. They want something specific. So that's it. Sorry this was so long. I tried to make it short. I hope you enjoyed. Bye, everyone.